They also questioned the otherworldly and ascetic monastic ideal, which devalued the natural world, science, and the practical affairs of life. Out of these grievances, many medieval Christians revolted against the rule of the papacy. Accordingly, as medieval Europeans sought to realize the external aspirations of their original nature, they also began to pursue its repressed internal aspirations. They called for the revival of the spirit of early Christianity, when believers zealously lived for the will of God, guided by the words of Jesus and the apostles. This medieval movement to revive Hebraism began with John Wycliffe (1324–1384), a professor of theology at Oxford University, who translated the Bible into English. He asserted that neither the papacy nor the priesthood could determine the standard of faith, but only the Bible itself, demonstrating that many of the dogmas, ceremonies and rules of the Church had no basis in Scripture. He denounced the priesthood for its decadence, exploitation of the people and abuse of power. The Protestant Reformation thus had roots in 14th century England, when papal dignity was at a low point. Similar movements for reform also arose in 15th century Bohemia and Italy, but they were crushed and their leaders executed. To raise funds to build St. Peter's Basilica, Pope Leo X began selling indulgences, which Catholic doctrine affirmed would remit the penalty for sin due in the next life. When this indulgence was proclaimed in Germany in 1517, a movement to protest this abuse ignited a fuse, which exploded in the Protestant Reformation under the leadership of Martin Luther. 1483–1546, a professor of biblical theology at the University of Wittenberg. The flames of the Reformation grew strong and soon spread to Switzerland. Under the leadership of Huldrych Zwingli, 1484–1531, to France as led by John Calvin, 1509–1564, and into such nations as England and the Netherlands. The wars of religion which swirled around the Protestant movements continued for more than 100 years until 1648, when the Treaty of Westphalia ended the 30 Years' War. Protestantism triumphed in Northern Europe, while among the peoples of Southern Europe, the Roman Catholic Church solidified its influence. The 30 Years' War between Protestants and Catholics was fought on the soil of Germany. However, this conflict was not simply a religious war. More than that, it was a civil and political conflict to decide the fate of the German states. The Treaty of Westphalia, which concluded this war, was both a religious settlement, which established an accommodation between the Protestants and Catholics, and a political settlement, which resolved international territorial disputes among such nations as Austria, France, Sweden and Spain.